Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Amy.
I think last week was only like one day long, so I'm like scurrying through the specification document.
That's okay. I took some time off last week too, and today, so I haven't really been able to make any changes or anything. But maybe we could spend this time to talk about. I don't know if any other folks are coming. Joshua said he's not coming. Um, Maybe we could spend the time to talk about sort of any specific issues. Hey, Brandon. I guess we'll give maybe people another minute to join. All right, so we have what, 6 people here. Um, so any suggestions for what we want to get accomplished at this meeting?
I think last time we discussed that we wanted to talk through some aspects of levels one and two, but I think
Mhm.
there's also some topics that need conversation out of that. The first half of that document, specifically around security requirements, and then what was the other one? Oh, and versioning names, but kind of we talked about that last week. So
Okay, I'm trying. So I'm getting all my tabs in order. So you said levels 1 and 2 details, uh, versioning, and sorry, and what was the other thing you said?
so last week we had talked about kind of locking down levels one and two and
Hmm.
then tackling three and four. But on another note, there's also the versioning conversation. It looks like there's a bunch of
Hmm.
comments around that, and maybe that might be a more productive use of our conversational time.
Great.
In the never
Okay.
ending security requirements discussion, which I'm happy to have.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that sounds good to me. Um, so do you want to discuss versioning first, since that kind of affects how we proceed, like you said? Because depending on how we do that, then it could allow us to kind of lock down 1 and 2, and then 3 and then 4.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Um, yeah, so Emmy commented on the hybrid, sounded good to her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so first of all, these are the ideas that I had gathered from conversations with various folks. Um, does that list even seem complete? I don't want to unduly.
It does to me. I couldn't think of other ones to add.
Um, so for reference, in the doc, we are in the versioning section. Um, and obviously any changes to the tech or any text or suggestions, we could make that. Um, I also agree that hybrid seems like a reasonable approach. My feeling is that like once you give something a name, it's really hard to rename it and not just add a bunch of confusion. I think if we are going to change the meaning of the levels or like the structuring of levels, now would be the time. I think this is effectively our only shot. So I guess we don't need to decide that specific thing right now, but effectively we could say that for the 1.0, level 1 will mean, assuming we don't change it, there is like you generate provenance, there's no guarantees effectively about what I think I might have had a draft of what that means somewhere else, but like there just is provenance. Level 2 means effectively it's signed or something, and 3 is some guarantee about the build or something like that. And then we could always tweak, minor revisions, but yeah. Any agreement or disagreement?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the big things are, even to go a little bit further. Um, I know we might not want to talk about, like, let's say specific attacks, but like classifications of like generally this starts to protect us against these sorts of things would be useful so that folks know, like, okay, as I'm building out my full suite of controls in for supply chain security, I know that if I'm only salsa one, I'm only getting this. If I'm salsa two, I'm getting this. If I'm salsa three, I'm getting these sorts of things. And this is what I need to think about when defining my security program for my software delivery.
Sounds good to me. If you don't mind, if you could add your name to the attendee list as well in the notes, or I could
Oh,
add if you just say it.
yeah. Actually,
Add you.
can somebody link me again? Because for some reason it's not showing up in my Google Docs, and I think it's because yeah.
Oh, Brandon, thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's because last time I wasn't on my laptop. So
I see. I just added you, Mike. Emmy, you're not listed there either. Thanks. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so effectively, and so for the naming, there's one comment. Emmy said V1. Any thoughts on like for how we specify the version specifiers for like when it matters? I pre-populated a list of potential names there, like revision 1, version 1, a date. We could also format it, put like the version first and then level instead of like the level then the version. I know that Emmy commented on one of them.
For what to name it, right?
Yeah, like.
Yeah. I feel like if our concern is that people aren't going to use that piece of it, we should make it as simple and easy to type out as possible. And if it's going to have to be something that's encoded, we don't want a bunch of extra characters on it, I think.
Yeah. I was thinking, because I also think about like other specifications. To me, the two main contenders are the version and the revision, like the rev. Rev would be 2 or 3 if you include the space more characters. But visually might be more in line with how other specifications do. I don't know. Go ahead.
So are you saying instead of using the term version 1.0, it'll always be a revision from the original? Like,
yeah, like literally just the label we call it.
that,
Like instead of saying
I see.
V1, we'd
So
say Rev 1.
Rev 1. Oh.
I think.
I look at all sorts of compliance stuff all day, and it never like faced me once on if like what they use, but I don't know.
Oh yeah, SSDF. Okay, SSDF calls it version.
But
Any other thoughts, opinions?
oh, I was just gonna throw another wrench in there, which is just
Sure.
yeah, SSDF calls it version, but if you look at NIST 853, it calls it revision. So
Yeah, that's
even
what I had
among
thought other ones call it revision.
yeah.
I have a
But
quick
even
question.
when they call it revision, don't they call it R? Just the letter R. They don't say R Rev.
Oh yeah, they use R at the end of, so it's like NIST 853, R4, R5.
Yeah.
Brandon, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm not sure that
Mhm.
my mic's working. Are we planning to do like minor versions and have some kind of like compatibility with that? In that case, like I think versioning probably would be people understand that pretty well.
Yeah. So being able to do 1.0 versus R1, R2, or
Well,
being able
in
to
the
do
case
version
that
1.2.
yeah,
Yeah, so I guess with the Heidelberg approach, we're agreeing that the gist of each level would stay the same, but I think that we'll need to be able to have minor revisions of like, we need to clarify or we didn't have some requirement. I guess one this is maybe getting off topic, so feel free to shelve this. Do we give a version number specifier? Like right now we kind of have like we're just publishing at head, and every time we make a commit, it's live. We could move to a model where we do actual releases. And like we have one way to preview the current head version, but the official version, we do on some sort of cadence. We batch up all the things and release it and give that a revision number.
Can you can you do an example of that?
Yeah. So for example, we made a change to the spec to add. Well, this is a pretty significant one. To change to add I think like the config as code was like one of the new entries that we added. I don't think we didn't bump up the the 0.1 release number for that. I don't remember if that happened before or after, but let's say we do that, something like that. Or we change the wording to clarify what parameter list means. And like, we say it's also okay to blah, blah, blah. Do we only bump the revision number? Like under what conditions do we bump the revision number, I guess? It's like, do we do it like on effectively almost every single commit? Or do we only do it for significant changes? Or do we?
I think that's a whole different topic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like we can define all that, what goes into the different versions and
Okay.
minor versions.
Well,
okay.
I also think that there's you probably want to split up, because I've seen with a lot of these standards and specifications, they sometimes include like here is something that is a clarification. It's not that we're actually changing the specification in some way. It's just hey, it seems like some folks misinterpreted what we meant here. This is sort of errata, kind of stuff there. I've seen that done, and that seems to make a lot of sense, where it's like you're trying to convey that you're not changing the actual content. This is always, this requirement still is staying the same. It's just that we need to clarify maybe a bit more of what that requirement means. So for folks who are maybe saw the previous, like the without that update, people can go and see, oh, okay, so actually what they meant was this, and it was always this. It's never like, oh, I'm compliant with a thing that actually didn't exist in the first place, right? Because it was misinterpreted or there was confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how often are we planning on having updates? Needs to kind of be sorted out as well, so that folks, it's all about how often you're gonna have to maintain. You have to like look at your attestations to see if you're still compliant. If someone comes out with a minor release, did it change your compliance level that you were saying that you were? But I think that's more of kind of a operational programmatic question that I'm going to propose we put it on as something that needs to be sorted out, but that, I don't know, I think probably easy enough in my mind to just pick one of these for specifiers and move forward with it. What do you think? Or do we go to like, does it need to go back to the main group for like a vote, or how does that work? Can you just, it seems like such a small piece of the pie that like.
Yeah, I suggest that. Yeah, I'm fine shelving this.
Okay.
I think we should just come up with our recommendation, like just a full recommendation of like, here's everything,
Okay.
here's what we thought, and then I don't know necessarily a vote, but rather like if you have comments or objections or anything, you could bring it up. But I think we'd assume, you know, and for each of the items, we could just list what our rationale was. I think that's probably the most effective route there.
So I can put something in here about out of scope for this piece that still needs to be sorted out is what we just talked about.
Sure. I added it to the meeting notes as well. So then in terms of like, do we call it a revision or a version? Any opinions?
I think, well, I wonder if versions might be a bit easier for users to keep track of, just because a revision with respect to what is always going to be the question, I think. And so if we can just say, this is discrete version 1.3 or whatever, that might be a bit easier for people to map to the requirements as opposed to the sort of revision with respect to version 1.2 or something, right? Yeah, so I guess my vote would be for using the version instead of the revision.
Any other opinions? You could also share in chat if you just want to like chime in. So we got 3 votes for version. Okay. I'll add mine. Okay, so it seems like I'm the only one who wants revision. Okay, sounds like, well, Mike.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'm
muted.
sort of.
Well, I think you're hard muted.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. I heard you say oh.
1 second. Can you hear me still? Okay.
Now I can.
So yeah, I think I mean my mind is just maybe a slight preference for version, but it's like you could flip a coin and I'd be like, yeah, it's fine.
Okay, sounds like the majority opinion is version. No one expressed preference for revision except for me, so version it is. And then like the V, like parenthesis V 1.0 syntax, sound okay? All right. And we'll keep like the SLSA 3 versus like L3 notation that we've had before. All right, sounds good.
Because in the name of SLSA, it says level, right?
Right. That's why, exactly. Yeah. That's why we didn't include it originally, because otherwise it would like an ATM.
Be redundant, yeah.
It'd be 1.0. Okay, that's great. All right, that sounds good then. And then so we could, I think the next step on the versioning thing would be to like effectively write this up in some official documentation around like the conditions under which we bump major and minor version numbers and compatibility and kind of effectively sum that up. But that could be done offline. I think we have at least kind of conceptual agreement on the gist, and it would just be nailing down wording. So shall we move on to the level 1 and 2 details?
Yeah.
Next step, nail down propose wording to be included. Spec. Slash, oops. Slash site. All right, so level 1 and 2 details. Yeah, I think at least it sounds like there's at least a couple opinions expressed to not specify at least version 4 now. It seems reasonable to do it. By the way, am I pronouncing your name correctly, Emmy? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure I'm not saying the wrong thing over and over again. That sounds good to me. Of like, let's nail down 1 and 2 with like effectively a draft idea of the future ones. One way that we could do this, actually, from like a practical point of view, is we could have a draft or like latest or head or something version of the site that has like all the things, and we kind of mark the things that are draft. But then on the actual published version 1.0 or whatever, we could just, I don't know, just kind of visually clarify like this is up in the air versus these are nailed down.
Okay. I'm thinking about some, I think they're under pull requests right now, or that can be sorted out at the same time. Like maybe we want to take a look at some of those. So like there's one group of requirements that is not, the way it's listed in the specifications makes it look like it's a set of requirements, but it's like the way you're supposed to attest, I guess. So it's not actually like listed in the like high level graphic at the top, but then if you scroll down, you can see a whole section of things that all say level 1, 2, 3, and 4 on them. Anyways, there might be more things like, you know what I'm talking about?
It's like, I think it's called provenance
requirements.
Contents.
Yes, yeah. So, but just with that in mind, there might be some other things too that I think we're like working through the different levels. We need to probably like grab some of those different things that need to be sorted through anyways, and like just circle them into this just so that it can all be updated together. People aren't left open with those. But I wasn't thinking that was, I don't even know if it's possible to lock down details of levels 1, 2 in a meeting. That might be something that we need to do offline, like have collaborative discussions. Just thinking.
Yeah, I have in the section in the doc, we define levels as outcomes, not requirements. Which if you like click my little picture in Google Docs, it should jump to my cursor. And there's a comment here. So I think one thing that I'd like to figure out is, and that I think does warrant discussion. Well, is SBOM. I'm going to shelve that for a second. So for level 1 and 2, my proposal here is that effectively level 1 is that provenance exists. I want your opinion on this, but like providing sufficient information to build the package from source. Because I'm trying to express it, like what value does it give to someone to have this information? That's maybe stronger than level 1 actually requires, but that might be something we do. Because I'm trying to think of like what's the value of SBOM, and effectively that is maybe one way to say of like how it could help security. That like if an organization wants to say, like, I'm not going to import any binary packages, I'm always going to build everything from source. By having provenance for the binary packages, you do gain effectively instructions for like, you gain confidence that when you're building from source, you could do it correctly. that could be potentially one benefit of level 1. And in terms of level 2, we add the signing that the adversary can't tamper with it. The accuracy is tested by some service. So like you effectively have someone, like there's some party who's claiming it versus like a random person on the internet. And from like a kind of compliance and like security point of view, it requires like someone would have to deliberately attack it. It requires like specifically evading controls. So that does raise the bar from the attacker profile. That's not just like someone, like there's a turnstile that someone would have to hop effectively, and it does deter some number of people. Yeah, go ahead, Emmy.
I feel like we might be comparing apples with oranges with with those descriptions, and maybe we do how it relates to provenance and how it relates to an adversary both in each level for the description. While you can draw correlations between the two, I don't think all users know what those correlations are. So to make it a little more user-friendly, if we had level 1 means this for like protection, I guess hardening, and it means this for provenance, and then level 2 means this for hardening and this for does that make sense?
I'm not sure. Any other thoughts? I have to process.
Brandon, you go ahead.
My thought was more around like the SBOM stuff. I wasn't sure whether we're talking about SBOM all the time with the signing and stuff like that. But at least I've had several conversations with different folks, and I think the question, like SLSA and SBOM both kind of solve slightly different problems. I guess the question is like, would we want to include vulnerability management within the SLSA framework, or do we want to keep that separate?
I think actually that ties in. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but just want to highlight a thing where I know we had kind of discussed this previously a little bit, which is right now SLSA is very focused on the provenance piece, right? Because provenance itself is not really something that's discussed a lot in the supply chain space yet. And so this is kind of like helping fit that need. But I remember in a bunch of the conversations, we were going back to like, hey, maybe 1.0 or post 1.0, we start to look at and separate, this is SLSA provenance, and then there's potentially SLSA vulnerability management and whatever else as time goes on. So just wanted to kind of, highlight that as something, I think we should keep on the provenance piece for right now. And then the second piece, which I think is tied to what Emmy was saying, which I agree with, is when implementing this at the previous place I was at, there was a big conversation about, okay, so what does SLSA 1 give us? And what is really, what are the takeaways of the different SLSA levels? And what are like almost the requirement, like what are the general human readable requirements? And the first one is like, the way that we had sort of defined it was SLSA 1 is about keeping track of what's going on, just keeping track of the logs, the build logs, and so on. Whereas a lot of companies today and organizations, projects could just be like, yeah, we throw out all the build logs after we're done with it and go, oh, well, if you ever need to go back, how do you know what happened, right? And that's just SLSA 1. And that doesn't really give us a whole lot, but it helps us go back and audit and start to figure stuff out. However, that would not prevent what SLSA 2 can help prevent is like, could anybody just sort of generate some provenance and just push it somewhere and say, yep, this log is what generated that artifact? Yes, SLSA 1 can, that doesn't protect against that, but SLSA 2 requires that attacker to have access to your secrets that are doing the signing. And that's kind of how we were going through to sort of show like what the takeaways are. And some of the takeaways go beyond the attack takeaways. Some of it's also just general efficiency stuff. Like as an, one of the other examples when we were talking about SLSA 2 is now this build system is the one that built it. If you have multiple build systems, you can have different keys and different identities associated with those build systems. And then you can always know and go back and, you have increased confidence that the provenance is correct. And for me, at least the takeaway for SLSA itself, at least as it's stated, the takeaway at every level of SLSA is you have increased confidence that the provenance is what it says it is.
Marcel?
Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. I like this. I like what you were suggesting, Mike, because sort of keeping track of things first, like you were saying, it seems like a very useful step towards actually sort of attesting to that. I guess what I also wanted to point out was that it might be helpful to provide users with a definition of like what all even falls under provenance, because I mean, SLSA has like a provenance specification, which is like the actual format, right? But it seems like right now we're also talking more broadly about other ways that we can understand how an artifact came to be, right? And so maybe providing, at least, especially if level 1 is going to be the sort of collect information about your build, providing sort of a definition or a list of what all falls under provenance, I think would be a good first step too. And so that could be something like SBOM, or does it have to be the SLSA specification itself?
Yeah, so maybe we make that clearer in the specification, because like right now, nothing, right, Mark, nothing requires SLSA. We just suggest that you use SLSA predicate format, but it could just as easily be an SBOM. But I think as we are, and this is kind of part of, I think, how this is something for the positioning group as well, is how do we want to like, how closely do we want to do that, right? Because there's definitely some questions and concerns around interoperability, right? Like if somebody is like, hey, I have millions of SBOMs, and now you're telling me that all of these are worthless because they're not SLSA specification, I think is something that we don't necessarily want to say, but we might want to have, and this is something that was being discussed in the tooling group on Friday, which is like, hey, maybe we also have some tools that can help translate between, if you have a signed SBOM, oh, okay, well, you could easily turn that into SLSA, specific, SLSA format. And I think largely these things are there. So I think we should, that's another piece though, which is I think we should be reevaluating what are the optional versus required components within SLSA predicate format, which I think we should just sort of have that as, even if you don't use SLSA predicate format, the values here are still probably the same values, whether or not they live in an SBOM or anything else, right? Because you probably still want to keep, a lot of this stuff right now is all optional. But I think as time goes on, we might want to say it's optional for lower levels, but probably required for higher levels. Mark?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with what everything was said. The intention was not to require a specific format, and I think we could do, I think having the same name is confusing. So that's, I think, something to consider of like, should we, I don't know how to do that. Originally we had, so for reference, originally we had it under the In-Toto project, but then it was hard to get agreement from everyone on like, what does the official In-Toto provenance cover? And in order to unblock that, we just moved it under the SLSA project, so that way we could define it for our purposes. What do we need? And for example, Tecton developed their own format. Since then, we were aligned, and the V0.2. so maybe we could revisit that in order, like perhaps not calling it. Yeah, just maybe that would be a way to avoid confusion. That's not required. Although maybe the confusion is valuable. I don't know. Coming back to like the definition of levels, I think so what do you so it sounds like having level 1 effectively be you generate this provenance data. We need to talk about what specifically is required at each level, because I think that, I forget who just said it. We should figure out the details, like, do you need to list the source repository? Do you need to list the dependencies? Is it best effort, etc. There's also another comment, by the way, that optional requirements are confusing, because like if it's optional at level 3, what the heck does that mean? Like, isn't it optional at every level unless it's required? So I think we should figure that out. But effectively, level 1 would be your like a records keeping thing, and then maybe we could talk about why you would care about these records and what value that adds. And then level 2 starts to add some amount of tamper protection and like accuracy guarantees. Well, does it have an accuracy guarantee? I don't know. That's, I guess, a question, because that's something you said, Mike, right?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely elements there, right? So as you go up, it's more about, I think, the tamper evidence and tamper proofness of the claims, because like there's nothing that today in SLSA that would prevent a build system that totally non-maliciously, it just turns out the build system is broken, from misreporting exactly how it built something, and I think those are, obviously two important pieces. Like I think the main purpose of SLSA is more from the security aspect, as opposed to the actual like accuracy, though I do think that as we kind of go through, obviously people are probably going to start poking around with the various build tools and saying, hey, is this accurately reporting the data? And then being able to kind of go from there. But I think that's something that is still like going to be an issue, right? Regardless, is like the what, as an example, right? When looking at the various stuff in the specification, and looking at build parameters and the build context and all the build environment information that we want to include in there, different tools are going to assume those are different things. So there's a level of how clear do we want to be versus how flexible do we want to be there, right? Because some people might just say, oh, these are environment variables. Some people might say these are parameters to the build, and yeah.
So in practical terms, like, I think it's valuable to define the levels in terms of like the outcome, but in like practical terms of like what you actually have to do to the level. I think level 1 is you just generate provenance, and you have to, at a best effort, populate this type of data, like with a specific piece of information, source, dependency, etc. We could discuss what those specific things are. First of all, does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay. And then level 2 is have it be generated by some service, have that service sign it. That I think we agree on. Are there any more requirements than that? I have one I want to discuss, but before I discuss that one, are there any others? Okay, so one thing that, now this is leading topics, but the verification piece, an aspect that I think we need to decide, at least as far as level 2 goes, or we need to make a decision for whether it affects level 2 or not, is something I want to introduce is that for a given package, that there has to be some definition of what the canonical or expected source repository is for that package. So for example, for the PyPI package, PyYAML, that is supposed to be built from github.com/YAML/PyYAML. That if someone builds from a fork of that's published to GitHub on a fork, or from like a fork that's on GitHub, or like their local copy, basically a commit that's not in the official repository on the correct branch or tag or whatever, then effectively that's not the same code, right? Because like you could just, an extreme example, just replace the entire contents with a completely different software. And so like, for example, that's what we do at Google. We have this concept, although like our current levels haven't had nearly this level of thought that we're putting into this meeting right now. So I feel like we need to introduce that at some point. The question is like, where do we introduce that, and do we require that at level 2, or do we at least defer it to a higher level?
So I think this thing is also one of the, it's tied to also the problem of who determines what the canonical source is. And also in certain contexts where, for example, right, like, how do you want to define for like Red Hat's version of a thing, right? Red Hat often has patches and whatever else. And so they are, they might be pulling from upstream code and injecting other stuff on it. And some people might say, actually, I trust that more than just the other package that's coming out. And so I think we do want to figure out, like, how do we support that use case while making sure that people understand, like, who is, like, because I think that the key here is what you care about is who is actually running the build against what, right? Like, is it a package maintainer? Is it a source maintainer? Is it like some distribution package maintainer or somebody else?
Yeah, and so this kind of, again, bleeds into the policy question, like what is the policy model, which we'll have to figure out. In my mind, the way it would work, like in practice, would be that for wherever is consuming this artifact, that there needs to be some sort of policy or configuration saying what is expected. So if I'm expecting it to be built directly from GitHub, then someone building it from Red Hat would not be acceptable, right? If in a different environment, if it is, I'm expecting it to be built, like, let's say the packages on the Red Hat Enterprise Linux, is that the current name for it? Like, or whatever distribution. If it's supposed to be built from there, then building it from GitHub is actually wrong, right? And like, it's supposed to be built from the fork. And those are two different packages, and they would have two different, effectively, policies. And so I mean, John.
You might have been about to step into this, but I was just wondering, does it satisfy this concern simply to make sure that source is listed in the provenance document? And as long as that is done, then downstream verifiers can look at that source? Or do you want policy verification to be built into the requirement?
I'm sorry, I was trying to type the previous notes, and
I'm sorry, I'm asking, like, is having the source information, GitHub versus Red Hat, in the provenance document, does that satisfy what you're going for, or you truly want a policy verification element potentially included as part of this SLSA level?
This would be the way it works in my mind. Well, and the way it works at Google and the way it works in my mind is that in the provenance document, it says where it was actually built from, and is tied to a specific artifact with a hash, right? If you build a new one, you get a new provenance. There's also a policy that, perhaps among other things, says all artifacts that are to be called PyYAML have to be built from this source. So it's like the provenance would be this artifact with this hash was built from this source with this hash. The policy would say, almost like a template or a matcher or something, saying, in order for something to be called PyYAML, it has to come from a source that looks like this. So it's not quite, it's like a different level. How to tie that into the level of definitions, I don't know. And if we are not going to put it in level 2, then it would be a moot point as well.
Yeah, so actually one point is that, I mean, you can actually do like this, that basically you have the Red Hat, for instance, like a sort of policy that defines you, okay, I can build from Red Hat, I can build from whatever. Actually, another possibility could be that, I mean, in this way, we are stressing who performs the actual building of the final artifact, okay? So it's basically the responsibility of who performs the build to decide if the package that is coming is, okay, kind of trusted, is kind of okay. Another possibility maybe is like we actually define some reference repositories, like for PyYAML, we reference GitHub, and then we say, okay, if there is somewhere else another dependency manager, another package manager for this, then this guy can ask for permission to be like accounted as an official repository. You see what I say?
I don't think I followed. Did anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that I think the question is, and is SLSA as a thing somehow an arbiter of truth on the sources here? And so I would kind of, I think I'm trying to think here, right, of I'm trying I think what we're trying to kind of get across here is people want to know like where the actual code came from. And I think there's a couple of things, which is a malicious actor, who puts a different repo than what they're actually building, right? Can just sort of say, hey, I'm building whatever. So I don't see what any of the verification gets you really, like outside. Well, sorry. I think we need to like separate out the verification piece, which is still like a valuable thing to know whether or not, let's say somebody's lying to you in some way. Like if there's ways you could look at the SLSA SLSA data and be able to verify it in some way that you can verify it in a way that the person who's actually making the claim can't falsify that own claim. Because I know there was some discussion about previously about like, hey, when looking at SLSA, could you go in and say, I'm a package manager here, and to prove to you, I can make an update to that source repository. I can like essentially put like a little test file there with an identifier regarding the build or something like that. So you can go and validate, oh, I made this change that, you know, essentially just made an arbitrary change to the code base, and then I can verify that. But I think to take a step back, I think that the main thing here is like most of what SLSA is based on is you are at some level trusting whoever is giving you the SLSA provenance. They are saying, hey, look, I did the right things. And at some level, you know, you have to trust them that they did the right things. The things that SLSA gives us is it gives us more it gives us tamper evidence, and tamper evidence when somebody outside of the person making the claim is saying, actually, I am that person, and this is the claim I'm making.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I got it. I mean, I think makes sense. I was just to, raise the point because I was not sure what is the best, what was the best.
So I think to add to what both Alessandro and Mike were saying, maybe this is just my interpretation, is I guess it would probably be very useful to have a notion of like what is a reference value for a specific source. I guess my question then would be, if I'm the actual package maintainer and I sign off on whatever the specific hash of my repo, and I say, if you're building from my repo, this is what the hash should look like. Is that evidence now for, I guess, the validity of the source? Does that just count as a reference value? Because, yeah, I guess hopefully that distinction makes sense.
I don't know, Mike.
Yeah, so what I think is valuable here, and this is just once again my opinion, is most likely, like, I imagine, especially with how SLSA is going and then what people are doing with this thing and what they're going to want to convey, right? People are going to convey is, hey, I wrote none of this code, but I'm a security company or whatever that has built that code very securely. That's the claim we're making. We're making the claim we didn't write the code, but we built the code securely. And that's kind of what is coming out of a lot of the SLSA stuff. The SLSA stuff is not necessarily that, it's all about the provenance piece, right? It's not that I'm claiming that somehow the software is not malicious. I'm just claiming that this software was built in these ways against this source code, et cetera, et cetera. And I think still from, and this is where the sort of adoption, positioning, and tooling comes into play, is I do think that, sorry, a second here. Oh, never mind. What the tooling is coming into play is, I think, super valuable here. Oh, give me 1 second. Sorry.
I don't know how long, if a literal second or a couple minutes. So in the meantime, I think there's a difference between, we need to agree on like wording and concepts here. I didn't actually mean verification that the claims being made are true. Like if you're built on GitHub Actions, that GitHub Actions is being compromised or is lying or there's a bug or whatever. Like that's not actually not what I meant. So maybe verification is the wrong word. But rather, I was thinking that like if I'm a PyYAML user and I do like pip install PyYAML, I want some guarantee that like the tamper protection stuff has happened, right? just because the PyYAML team has agreed, we will always use, again, say GitHub Actions to build. If someone uploads a version that wasn't built by GitHub Actions, like what's stopping them from doing that? And I feel like there needs to be some sort of thing stopping them in the path between like the publisher and the user. So that's what I meant by policy, but I think, yeah. So, all right, so we're almost out of time. So, okay, so I take from this conversation, I propose that we do not include that level 2 because it sounds, for 2 reasons. One, I think it adds too much to, like from a practical side, well, one, it's we can't even, I think we don't even have a shared mental model for how that would work. And 2, I think we could add it to a later level because we kind of want to make each of the steps achievable without like too big a jumps between steps. And so this would probably be too big of a jump. And so we can work on kind of shoring up what this means and get a better, first of all, agreement on what it is, and then figure out like, do we actually want it as a requirement? But we could defer it to a future level. And so effectively level 2 would just be more, again, guarantees about the accuracy of the provenance as opposed to like, you know, someone building from forks or something like that. That's not something that's protected from level 2. I see some nodding heads, so. Okay, someone's highlighted that. Yeah, if you want to just add the comment in the doc to say to move to future level. That sounds good. So I'll say consensus move to higher level, not part of L2, level 2. No, still don't have a clear shared mental model for how it works alone. Clear wording plus. All right, don't have a clear mental model, too big of a jump from 1 to 2. Okay, great. All right, so we're out of time. Calendar, yes, I think it's still missing from the calendar. So next steps, I think if we could continue revising the docs, feel free to make any suggestions, changes, and if you have thoughts on what to discuss next time, that would be great. All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
See you
Thank
then.
you.
Bye, have a great week.
Thank you guys. See you.